Warning: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are warned that the following program may contain images and voices of deceased persons.
The State Government Bushfire Recovery Program funded Parks Victoria and the Department of Sustainability and Environment to commission an archaeological consultant to work with Aboriginal communities to conduct cultural heritage surveys across the high country and alpine areas of Victoria. There were several legislative Aboriginal communities as well as traditional owner groups involved throughout the process. They surveyed along ridge lines, through river valleys, across ancient landscapes, camping areas and travel routes, discovering hundreds of cultural sites, thousands of artefacts, discovering rock shelters, grinding grooves and stone axes. It's important to realise that this is a cultural landscape and it's an honour to be part of preserving this for future generations.
We're hoping to get everything rerun again the way it was in that circle of our generation. Initiations, hunting, gathering, dancing, all them things can be shown again. Because we're back to identifying who we are and where we're from.
Sometimes it takes disaster sometimes to bring a lot of things to the forefront. And I think what this wildfire has done, the devil fire I call it, is sort of highlighted that and brought something, our heritage to the forefront in terms of our connection and the proof is in the landscape of thousands of years of connected with the alpine country and the sites that have were uncovered by that devil fire.
The rediscovery, you might say, of these sites came about in a very natural way, actually. You know, there was lightning strikes that set off great fires, and that 2 years ago, the old high country was alight.
Flying over the fire at odd times, we saw, extreme fire behaviour. Fire that was crowning, fire that was spotting many kilometres ahead of the main front. The fire generated so much heat, such a large updraft, that it built a cumulus cloud on top of the fire that actually generated its own lightning storm. The fact that the fire cleared so much vegetation and enabled archaeologists and community people and traditional owners to actually see what was under the vegetation was a unique opportunity, and that really rewrites the history of human occupation of the high country of Australia.
Can't underestimate the opportunity it presented, ironically, after those major fires. Prior to that occurring, there was a reasonably large blank spot in this part of Victoria as far as site distribution goes. A lot of the area is heavily vegetated, deep gullies, steep ridge lines and so on. And so I guess it wasn't totally a surprise that was the case. With the fire going through, it opened up many areas for access, for visibility with devegetation through the fire.
The project was about identifying all those areas and the unknown cultural values that existed throughout the Alpine National Park and State Forest. Over 300 new sites were located through the surveys.
After the survey project was completed, there was a whole range of different sites that were able to add to the story of occupation here. The findings of the project were highly significant for our understanding of this area. It doubled, nearly tripled the existing information that we had.
As archaeologists, sometimes wouldn't it be good to have a set of glasses that could look through various things such as grass or leaf litter or even through dirt to see things. In the Minamata Valley you didn't have to dream, you had it. You had it, it was all there. So you're talking about complete slopes being occupied by Aboriginal people, and these sites are just repetitive, site after site after site. The amount of heritage values up there and how widespread it was mind-blowing. So it'll rewrite Australian Alpine region. There is no doubt about that.
Oh, thank God we've got some bears to some person to do.
This is the first bucket of a particular spit that we're digging at the moment.
We're sort of down, sort of below about 10 centimetres on the second spit at the moment. You know, potentially going back hundreds, if not thousands of years in theory.
I'll just mark that up. The amount of charcoal we're getting here is suitable for AMS dating. There's a little bit of sediment in there, but if we choose to send it off for dating, it'll be cleaned up. Now, coat, charcoal, and I'll need to add on to that when we measure the level.
A 6 centimetre spit, that's fine by me.
Some of the strategy behind us doing the dating is considering this is sort of one of the highest altitude excavations in a rock shelter to be been done on the mainland in Australia. We're hoping that the dates that we possibly get this will shed some light on, I guess, that past occupation of this area. And we know it's very significant for a number of reasons for thousands of years, this area, but some of that scientific knowledge will just add an extra picture to the piece of the puzzle.
Now this is a hammerstone that was that has evidence of damage, if you like, on the ends here, small pecking on either end. It's a water-worn cobble, very smooth, so it's obviously not from up at this high level. It's from a drainage area, a creek or a river lower down. It's been brought up here, transported up here, and it would have been used as the hammer onto a core such as this one, and would have been struck downwards to produce a flake. So I've got 3 different pieces here. I've got the hammerstone, the core, and I've got a flake here. So that would have been hit there, and that flake falls off and produces the material that we find.
It can be used for the bark or for the artefacts or the wood. It can be also used as a cutting tool as well for skinning animals. So there's multi-purpose uses as well. It's a pretty common stone. You'll find it's a very high quality white quartz stone that you'll find a lot in, certainly in the high country. It's a siltcrest stone, and we found many that were uncovered with the wildfire in the Alpine country. One ridgeline extended almost 3 kilometres, and it was almost at the end of that ridgeline, on the point of it, that we found this beautiful siltcrest, pink siltcrest stone. The next one we have is a spearhead, is made also from a stone from the creeks and rivers. It has a point on it, as you can see, that is embedded in the spear for use in terms of the hunting.
Because there haven't been that many rock shelters excavated in the last 10-20 years. It's one of our great opportunities. Plotting the levels at the top part of this sandy layer which is just beginning to appear beneath the top black stuff. It's quite a critical, there's a change in colour. It was sort of exciting to see because until then we didn't know whether we were going to see any stratigraphy at all, any layer formation. It might all have been just mixed up like in being in a cake. But it isn't a mixed up cake, it's got layers in it. That's very critical for us archaeologists to find. You land on top of it and it just looks like a shapeless sort of bits of charcoal around, but when you see it in a section you can see that it is a kind of oval lens, and that really is an old fireplace. So that's human occupation, and it's tremendous to have it, and it will make a very good sample for dating.
So as well as the distribution, we can talk about where sites are and aren't, and possibly may be and may not be, but hopefully we'll also be able to say something about when this occupation occurred.
Well, you know, this is sort of the northern boundary, Mount Lock here, and this spur line that goes down to the Kumunga Gap is Gunai country. And so everything that goes back to the south here, back behind me, it's all Gunai country. You look to the east down there, right around to sort of Benambra and out towards Cozzy, you got Yathmathang and Monaro people. And over to the west of us there, you got Michimbuda around the Buffalo River and the Mount Buffalo itself. And sort of around Feathertop here. And further through you can see that gap down there into the Kiwa Valley. That's sort of Dadaroa country down the lowlands. So what you see is sort of, you know, these big open plains and people coming up on top of them and meeting each other. Aboriginal people moved up in these sort of alpine zones, and you know, so they came up November, December, January, February, right through to March. This movement pattern's a commonality in the high country of Victoria. And, you know, it's a pattern that's evolved over thousands of years, and people follow that pattern of moving with the food resources. As they dried out down lower, down these river valleys, they'd move higher and spend the summers up here, and a little bit higher there up in those really open plains. You know, it serves as a protection zone too. If there are any lightning strikes or fires that were moving around those lowlands, they'd be able to see them.
Ceremonies, they were the building blocks of this culture. Every life lived and died at the ceremony. They were able to be revitalised, so to speak, from there, and they were on their way for another year. Kilometres and miles didn't matter two hoots. It was the spiritual journey that mattered. All the time they were going, they were being energised by these very special places and all the ceremonial events that took place on their way around. Spiritually, they were always healthy and strong and happy because they believed that their great creators travel this journey.
From a spiritual perspective, those ancestors are still watching over the landscape today, and to be able to walk in their footsteps across the landscape, to journey through places that have been journeyed through for thousands of years, to be able to revisit those places is a very important and powerful aspect of people's life today. For the wider community and for the departments to recognise that there is a powerful spiritual aspect to cultural heritage is a very important part of the recognition and respect for Indigenous communities, relationships to the landscape.
It's one of those old belief systems, I suppose, with Aboriginal people, that the signs of animals can give you good signs or bad signs, and you know, seeing when you get to the top of a mountain, you see birds of prey and you see eagles, you know, they're good signs for our people. And other times you might hear black cockatoos and you think, oh yeah, that's rain coming. Sometimes the country will open up and allow you to walk through and you see things, and other times it won't allow you to do that. So you've got to be patient with it. And whether the spirits out there uncover things for us, it's sort of a constant reminder that we're being guided by the spirits of our ancestors when we walk through this country. In time, you've got to earn your right to come into this sort of country. Well, the travel routes around here are sort of spur lines and these flat open plains, you know. You can see the spur line in behind me here going down, and you can see it crossing. Nice spur there, nice easy walking. And you see the other side that it's not too bad going up there, so people would have been sort of constantly looking up here, which is the best way and the easiest way to get across this terrain. You know, whether that spur line looks too steep for the kids to go up or for the elders to go up. Or these travel routes are sort of all over the place here, the old bridle trails that the early explorers used were, and then, you know, later it become sort of roads were Aboriginal travel routes, if you like. The major focus in the past has been on bogong moth as a food resource, and but there are a lot of other foods up here that they can live on. You've got these rich herb fields, protection of snow gums, all sorts of things. This ability to be able to move from one side of a big flat plain, move onto the northern faces in the early summer periods. Late summer they'd move onto the southern side and start to sort of collect fruits and berries and the bush tucker down that side. These little seeds on here are caraway seeds, so you can sort of grind them up, even make bread out of them, you know, sort of put it in a flour mix and add a bit of flavour. And Aboriginal people, they're browsers, they move through, and the little bits that you eat keep you going. Some people sort of think that yam daisies aren't up here in this high country, but here's one here. We're on top of Mount Loch or close to it, and try and get the tuber, which is what they call murnong. But this is quite a small one, but still a little feed on that.
In some of these crevices, and you probably would see there's moths flying out of these areas. People would have hunted them out, basically using smoke and fire. The smoke would drive them out and people would collect them in their dilly bags. Their abdomen is full of fat, and that fat is really high in energy. You know, you'd probably process them by removing the wings and the heads and grind them up on some of the grinding stones that we've found lower down below the hill on some of those old ancient campsites.
You know, people went up into those crevices there, grabbed the moths in dilly bags, brought them back down here, sitting under these beautiful big snow gums and enjoying a feed of bogong moth. At this time of the year, like we're in April now, the tucker's still here, people would still be here and starting to think about moving down off these mountains, down the lower river valleys, and what they'd be doing is slowly move through and put little burns, cool burns through this country, not to hurt any of this vegetation that I've been showing you here, some of these bush tucker plants. It's important to sort of encourage these things, and there's quite a lot of dry litter in there that if you fire at the right time, you're not going to damage the plant or the food resource there. And so Aboriginal people had this sort of knowledge base about these things. Tribes were coming down to places like this. People would be moving off the tops there and coming down to this warmer climate. So getting down to this environment, it's still cold at night, but it's warm enough during the day to hunt and fish. And you know, these locations are basically the second home, if you like. This is, you know, their winter grounds, and then once they'd sort of exhausted some of the resources here, they'd move on to another river. And so they'd move around these transects in their country, not over-exhausting the resources, but following them. Just over behind us here was a high point with a lot of artefacts on it, so that was, it shows that there was a high position on the river to camp on. You have these specific locations where people said, hey, this is a really easy route for all the family to come to. We're not talking about just men, we're talking about women, children, old men, the whole family to sit down and enjoy.
The old fellows, they were masonries, they were geologists in terms of stone, and in their travels looking for the right sort of the stone that they needed to make their tools. And this one is a granite stone, a blue granite. As you can see, it's been hedged and sharpened in the grooving stones that are along the rivers and creeks, the sandstones, even in some of the granite areas there's grooving stones along the various rivers. And these stones were collected and worked upon for many hours by our old fellows.
People would have been sitting next to the river, just watching the kids and just sharpening the axes, sharpening the tools. And you can see on the edge there, it's starting to work its way around. And of course, a lot of the tools were multi-use, multi-purpose, so there's a bit of grinding going on there. You can grind things out. Some of the seeds, make them into a nice little powder, add a little bit of water and then cook them.
This place would be identified through that tribal group, would know where those areas were, and that knowledge was passed on by the older men to the younger men, then to the younger boys in their learning, and so that the continuation of knowledge would be passed on. These areas along those rivers and creek beds and ridge lines. Yes, through our eyes we see the landscape different. We respect the landscape, and we certainly hope that other people that in their learning and will respect that and understanding of that.
We can sense things very strongly, you know, like where we're not meant to be and where we are meant to be. When we're in that right area, we can sense the strength and the feeling of who we are and why we're here. You know, like I can feel it right up through my feet. From the ground up, right up through, you know, like through to my heart, you know, my soul. You know, I feel my ancestors all around me here. Yeah, it's very hard growing up in a place where you're not from. You know, like you haven't got no cultural connections or things like anything like that. No, you're not allowed to walk to places where you're not meant to. The background there, this Yammer thing, that's where we all come from, where we all originated from. Just being back here has really changed a whole new world for me. Being back in your own country, you're allowed to learn no matter what.
Some of the important aspects of the relationships have been connecting people. It takes time to develop relationships. People don't open up straight away, not overnight.
Working with a number of different community groups and camping up here and building better relationships and stronger relationships has also been something that has been great to be involved in.
Our door has always been open for people to come and sit down and talk with us about things.
People need to be shown a commitment through their actions, and certainly through this program, it's over 2 years from the fire, and we're certainly following through with a lot of the commitments that we've made to the communities.
When the fires broke out, there was, I don't know how many kilometres of fire breaks in place by dozers, but they affected the sites. So in that way, I think it's brought together the community and the land managers a bit more, because the land managers actually are now starting to really have an understanding of what are the concerns of the Indigenous people of that area.
There's an incredible opportunity for Indigenous communities and the departments to share knowledge and manage land in a much more sensitive way than has been done previously in the past.
The place that you would logically use a machine to push in a mineral earth break are usually on ridges or flatter ground or easy routes of transport, which sadly mirrors the pattern that Indigenous people use the landscape as well. We're totally unaware of the impact that we had on cultural heritage values through that suppression effort until we had monitors and archaeologists look at it later.
They'll always need to build roads and bridges and things like that, and I think what we'd like to see is that, sure, you do it, but be cautious and be respectful and so on, that you don't destroy this beautiful place.
Recently we had a gathering of the first people of the Alpine country, and a lot of knowledge was exchanged by the various tribal groups, and a lot of people that came there had never been in their own country, in their own country, and I think a lot of learning for them as well was exciting to them to have an understanding of that Alpine country and what it provided for the needs of their various groups.
And for Tanarong people who attended the Australian Alps First Peoples Gathering has been very significant. One, because traditionally we had connection to this land, not as traditional owners, but as people who shared culture with traditional owners up here through ceremony, dance, song. And I think for a lot of the young people to see the old fellas and old women talking culture, talking responsibility, respect, and bringing us all back together to speak in one voice.
Our community will feel a very powerful pride of this place, knowing that we found evidence of occupation through here. They'll revisit their links with the past through this amazing find.
Yeah, it's a big turning point for our bloodline. We've really got something to show for our kids and give them something to really look up to in life.
We're certainly making a lot of efforts recently to involve Aboriginal communities in not only cultural heritage but in broader aspects of park management. Indigenous communities have a lot of interest and also that same shared sense of custodianship for the landscape. That opportunity to work with Indigenous communities brings a level of knowledge to the table which we don't always have within our organisations. On the same token, it's a great opportunity for Indigenous communities to learn about the way we manage landscapes.
Through this process and by talking with Indigenous people, talking to them about their culture and about their history and about their knowledge of the Alps is leading me to have a much greater appreciation for how much they care for the country, how much they respect it, and how much I similarly have to respect the Indigenous people and their cultural heritage values. I think Uncle Albert puts it, very plainly and very simply that it's about respect. We've got a job to do. We've got to manage our forests and manage our parks, and by having dialogue with traditional owners, and communities, I think we're coming to a much greater understanding of each other's roles and a much greater degree of respect for each other's opinions and values. To encourage Indigenous people to move into the management of their traditional land is just a beautiful thing. I mean, it seems right and it seems natural.
There's a groundswell of understanding between the Aboriginal community and Parks and the Department of Sustainability and Environment. We've got this opportunity now to build on that, and people are working together.
There's been very strong consultation and representation, participation of Aboriginal groups in this whole project, and I think that's something that has continued to empower a lot of groups, relationships within groups, and that's something that we can take away.
A lot of cross-cultural knowledge is shared, and that the land and the animals that live on it in particular are the ones that benefit from it. You know, that humans are but secondary beings. The Alpine National Parks have a whole gift of knowledge to give to everyone. I mean, I've been taking you around showing you bush tucker and talking about travel routes and that. Well, that should be available to everyone to sort of learn about. I think that's important. If we're going to become part of an Australian people, then we've got to have that broad brush go over the lot of us. You know, that's important.
I've talked to various people that said we have never seen anything up there that identifies your people with connection with the Alpine country. Well, I suppose we're rewriting history now and saying, yeah, we're here and people need to know about us.
I never got shown a thing about my culture or heritage or anything. It's a lot of it was lost, and now I've really got something to show my kids where they're from and how they're meant to grow up and be strong.